So this is Alex Howard with O'Reilly Radar here at the Government 2.0 Expo here in Washington, D.C. I'm talking with Tim Berners-Lee, who is reasonably called the father of the World Wide Web. He invented HTML, which I still use to create web pages here and there. One of the things you've been working on more recently has been open data, specifically working with the British government on their own version of a data.gov at data.gov.uk. Can you tell me what is open linked data and why it's important for the evolution of the web and governments?
Well, open data is important for lots of reasons. Open data is valuable to people. And in fact, what's interesting about government data is that generally it's being paid for by taxpayers' money and it's sitting there on some computer going round and round. It's been used maybe for producing a report, but it could be used for all kinds of other things. And so long as it's not, we're not talking about personally identifiable information. So talking about information like where the potholes are, when the buses run, the state of the nation, where the money is being spent, that sort of thing. In most cases, this is information which would be given out if there was a Freedom of Information Act request. The change of philosophy now is, if you would give it to me, if I was going to ask for it, why don't you just put it on the web first? So that's the new philosophy, the new movement. So open data, there's lots and lots of data which is important to have on the web. That's really what, so last year in 2009, I was just pushing for open data in general. Government data specifically, well, I happened to get asked, Gordon Brown, who was Britain Prime Minister at the time, asked me what should the UK do to make the best use of the internet, and I said put your government data on the web, and he said yes. So we had a sort of short-term project which I suppose ran from the summer and has made its first milestone in the launch of the data.gov.uk site in February, with a whole bunch of interesting data there. So, and what was really exciting to see was that the US, with its data.gov, has been very competitive. In fact, the competition has been wonderful between the two countries, trying to show who can put the most data out, or put the most interesting data out, or have the best apps community. So the UK, in fact, didn't release its data for 6 months or so while it had, but it was developing the developer community, so it had like 2,500 odd people ready to use the data when the thing opened. So the competition has been great, and I think both sides have risen to it in a playful sort of way. You asked about what's linked open data. Specifically, so the linked bit means that it's using the linked open data formats. They have the property that anything, whatever it is the concepts identified by URLs, just like you typically you're used to on the web to identifying the web page with the URL. And you can put that in the browser. Where with data, when something like, say, just the concept of a town is identified with a URL, Philadelphia, say, is identified with the URL, if I look up that URL, I can pull back the data about it. And when I pull back the data, if it's linked open data, then that means I get data about Philadelphia, or maybe its population, but also I get relationships between states and capitals of states, about capitals and mayors in towns, and so these relationships, they all are between things which are identified by URLs. So I can end up pulling more and more data. So as a journalist, as a scientist, I can just explore, but also machines can explore, and they can find out what this relationship looks for patterns. And we can pull all this data into a big store and query it and do very powerful things. So when it's linked, it's just much more valuable, because the data that you've got about Philadelphia links to the data that I've got about Philadelphia, and we'll discover new things by linking that together.
Now, as you say, there has been a friendly competition across the Atlantic of the two different sites. The data.gov here in the US just relaunched. Do you think you'll be seeing a refresh from the British side soon as well?
Well, the British side's just been through an election, so it's got some new leadership to the government, and I think we'll have to. There's lots of things that they've got to do. But it's if you saw, for example, David Cameron's talk at the TED conference, it was about the importance of open data. So I think that, and that's very much into the manifesto of the current government, just as it was in the last government. I think really it's a non-partisan thing. It's you see it in lots of other countries as well. You see it in cities. So this is just, it's a movement. Everybody is realizing the value and the power of connecting open data together. And so I'm sure it's going to. As we speak, every now and again there is something is being added to each of these repositories on both sides of the Atlantic. And in fact, there has been a lot of spending data has been asked for, and is going to appear, I think, on the UK site. So that's
interesting, because there was a relaunch of usaspending.gov here, and Kundra has talked about the different ways that the different data sets can be sliced and diced to reveal some insights where they cross over about nutrition, education, health, environment, all the different areas.
Well, of course, the slicing and dicing is really valuable. One of the values of doing linked open data and linking it, of course, is it actually does get outside, it breaks down these boundaries. Yes, Vivek was interested in breaking down boundaries between different things within the USA, but of course it's interesting to break down the boundaries with other countries. So one of the things that Jim Hendler and crowd have done at RPI is to take for example, the funding by the US of developing countries and pull that data and then merge it with the data from the UK about developing countries. And so now he's got a mashup where you've got mixture. You can look for any, click on applicant and country and see what proportion of the funding to that country came from the US and came from the UK, obviously presumably adjusting for the pound-dollar exchange rate. But that that is an analysis which you can only do because he's managed to get linked data about both countries, and then once you got that, then you can put it together. So lots of ways of slicing it, but using the standards, of course, is really important.
Well, so that leads to the next question then. As you look at this international movement around open government, open data, standards are essential. What are the standards that you advocate or believe in for governments to adopt so that they can combine their data and make something useful of it across borders?
Well, I've been talking about this 5-star thing where, in fact, the standards are important. You have to recognize that, if I give people up to 5 stars for the data, we should give people 1 star just for putting the data out there, even if it's a fax of a photocopy of a document with the data on it, okay? Because going through the social hoops which involved in actually getting the data out there are sometimes huge. Okay, but it's not very usable. Having a machine-readable form is important. 2nd star for getting it in machine-readable form. So if you've got it in an Excel spreadsheet, it's machine-readable. However, you don't get the 3rd star because the 3rd star is for having non-proprietary, so an open standard. So if you take that spreadsheet and dump it into just the CSV or into XML, then that's non-proprietary. You're not expecting all the people who use it in the future to have to go and buy some particular piece of software. So that's 3 stars. The 4th star is for using the linked data standards. So the linked data standards, the model is RDF. There are a number of serializations for it. You can put it in HTML pages as RDFA. There's RDF XML as the classic way of doing it. There's a kind of nifty format some people like called Turtle or N3. So there are various ways of serializing, actually putting it in a file, but use the RDF model. When you use the RDF model, then you're giving your rights to things. That's if you like, it's linkable data. You're using, so that's the RDF serializations. Often, what you'll do is provide a SPARQL. That's SPARQL. That's the standard for the query language, and the query protocol. In fact, that allows people to query it over the networks. If you've got a lot of data, it's better to let people query it remotely rather than make them have to download the whole thing. So the RDF series and SPARQL, the RDF schema and OWL are the things you use for describing the terms you're using. And so those are the standards, but that still, when you use those standards, that only gets you 4 stars. Okay. So you get the 5 stars by actually doing the linking. That's by actually saying, okay, we're going to look around somewhere else and we'll notice that, we're using the concept of population. Well, we're going to use the same. We'll actually put a link to say that our concept of population is the same as the population concept in Wikipedia, say, as it's, or the database version of Wikipedia, which is DBpedia. So to say that this column in our data, this population is the same as their column, that's actually really valuable. It allows people to do a query on their data and actually then throw in your data as well and get extra results. That's when you start actually connecting things together and getting real extra value.
So that's a 5-star system. How are the world's governments doing so far in those counts?
Well, actually, you mentioned the USA relaunch has right down the front page. There's the RDF logo, that three blue balls, and there is a link to a list of linked data sets. What has not got the 5-star ratings? In principle, we should be able to write a program which will go down and more or less work out the star ratings for those automatically. I think, to be honest, there's a lot of stuff which is 2-star and 3-star. There's, I think at one point, 15% of the stuff in the UK was linked data, was 4 or 5-star. But I don't know the ratios. It's constantly changing, of course, because as people like RPI and like people in the UK government, there are people who are taking data which has been produced and has less stars and adding stars to it, putting work into it to upgrade it. And just as they upgrade something, and of course somebody releases a whole bunch of stuff with of lower quality data. So it's a constant. Sometimes it's a pipeline. Some people just release it initially as 5-star data because they get it, and it's the easiest thing to do.
And as you look at the different ways that open data is being used, what kinds of innovation are you seeing, and what kinds of innovation do you expect to be possible in a year or 2 years as this open data movement spreads and people are able to make the data better, make it more real-time, and make it more extensible?
Well, I think at the moment the typical thing is the Mashup or the iPhone app. So there was a recent hackathon in the UK Home Office where the people took, for example, crime data, and one person, this was a hackathon, what could you do during a single day? I think the youngest contestant was 14. So there's all kinds of creativity. So people were doing both websites but also phones, apps for your favorite phone. About sort of what's my neighborhood like, what does it score, where are the safe areas, where are the unsafe areas. So if you look at data.gov.uk, there is an app. There's one of them. It has one of the many now app libraries, if you like, where you can browse and see those. So apps seem to be the thing of the moment, and app competitions seem to be the thing of the moment.
Sure.
They've happened both sides of the Atlantic and internationally. The guy from Sunlight Foundation was just talking about them. So at the moment, apps, for typically web apps and mashups, I think in the future we'll see maybe more powerful. I hope we'll see really powerful things, which, if you like, combine different apps, so that if there's an app for looking at a piece of spending, and there's an app for looking at a state, and there's an app for looking at a particular government fund, that we'll see these things start to connect together, so that you start to get more powerful tools which will allow you to do the slicing and dicing, which are built, which allow you to move from one domain to another, but also allow you to use specific views for looking at specific domains. I think there's a lot of creativity which is going to be used as the data gets more connected, in building really powerful ways of surfing that data and analyzing that data and finding patterns. And I think it'll be really interesting to see also what new things turn up. As we've been hearing today, people that get arrested because, or people who maybe make scientific discoveries because there are correlations which are starting to get detected out there.
And as you see the web that you were at the heart of building, 20 years ago now, as you've seen that develop, it's a fragile thing in some ways. Different closed gardens or communities can grow up within it. As you've seen it evolve, what excites you and what worries you, especially as governments go increasingly online to deliver essential services?
There are always the worry that one particular thing, whether it's a government or a company, gets to completely control it. Obviously, it's decentralized. It's a decentralized space. It works because everybody shares the common standards. If people stop using the common standards, it'll fragment. If somebody gets to control who you can communicate with, gets to censor it or gets to spy on everybody, then its usefulness is destroyed. But there's so many people who rely on it. There's a huge outcry when those things happen.
Yeah, well, it seems that the idea of the open web is challenged in some ways by the growth of social networks. Is that something?
It's always been challenged throughout the ages, throughout these 20 years, that which seems ages sometimes. Sometimes it seems like a minute. There have been challenges. There have been challenges when there have been monopolies in different areas. But it's been amazing how one monopoly has been overturned by another one, and suddenly one thing that people were worried about has been replaced by something else. But there's so many people working to keep it one web, that I am very optimistic.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.